So I'm finally starting to make a cutting board that I've planned out for years. The first step for this is I have to square up all of my stock that I'm going to end up turning into the individual pieces of this cutting board. And I've tried to shorten this whole process, but this is still going to end up being a very long video, and I do apologize for that. Now, once I have everything squared up, I can start cutting them into 1.5 inch blocks. And if I were to do this over again, I would try and make this a little bit easier to do in mass. This is probably the biggest issue that I ended up having during this whole experience, was making all these individual pieces. Now, I made up the design in an app called Pixel, which is why I have my phone out. And what I'm doing here is I have blocked off the corners, which are going to not be glued together at this stage, and I'm trying to glue everything in. For this cutting board, I ended up having mahogany, oak, walnut, and maple. As you guys will end up seeing later in the video, I ended up having to make a modification to the original design plan, but I think it worked out for the best. One of the changes that I would make if I was doing this over again is I would probably use something other than oak. I ended up using it because I had it lying around, but I would probably use something like a Afromesia that is better for cutting boards. Oak tends to have a grain pattern which isn't the best for cutting boards. I'm trying to show you guys a decent bit of the process. Fair warning, this is going to end up getting your hands very dirty. If you want to go through and do this with gloves, no one will shame you. It is definitely a good idea, as I think I ended up cleaning my hands 5 or 6 times during this process and another 4 or 5 times after. To get all the glue on the pieces, I just took a marble tile that I had lying around, and I ended up putting the glue on that, and that seemed to work pretty well for this application. I ended up cutting this video down a bit, and there's the end product after I have everything glued up. Now I'm just trying to cut everything into a more manageable kind of space. And so once I had this down, I first tried to run this through a planer, which was not a good idea. I got a couple of passes through, and then it ended up just bogging out and getting very annoyed. I've done planing end grain before. It's not the most fun, but it's normally not as bad. This time was significantly worse because I had non-secured pieces in each of the corners. So instead, I opted to use a router sled. And this was one of my first times using a router sled. So unfortunately, I had it moving all over the place until I kind of got the skill down after the second or third pass. Now I ended up cutting out a good section of doing all the routing because this video is already too long. So I hope you guys do not mind. Here is the end result, which I kind of wetted down. And now it is time to cut off all of that excess wood that I had for the planing step. Now, if I was doing this over again, I would be more careful not to cut off the edges too much. Normally I like having the cutting board cut off a little bit more, but with this step, I realized that I would have to redo those cuts, and it would have been a lot nicer if I didn't have so much area taken out. Now, this is what really makes this cutting board unique, which is I'm doing a waterfall pattern with the end corners, and you're going to be able to kind of see it here with one of the edges facing the camera more. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm using super glue to get a quick bind, and then wood glue for the long-term support. And I'm having each of the corners just fall down in an erratic pattern until you get to the final block, which is touching the ground. This is kind of the basis of this design. I actually ended up stealing this kind of idea from a woodworker that I saw on YouTube a few years back, who was doing a similar thing for a coffee table. And I thought, hey, that's really beautiful. I wonder what it would be like if I did that for a cutting board instead. Now that I'm getting to the last couple of pieces, I had to make a modification as I'd used up most of my walnut, making pieces that were destroyed during the planing incident before I moved to the router jig. And so I changed the last 3 blocks to be made out of oak instead of the walnut. And once I had everything done, I could just go and clean up all the sides and get them all squared up. Now, I did not show all the sanding that I did, but any woodworking video would not be complete without a somewhat sanding section. So here is a couple of seconds of sanding to satisfy all of those non-believers. One of the issues I ended up having with this was there was a lot of glue that had been spilled out. And so whenever I did the final sections, because I couldn't really sand it that well, I ended up cleaning a lot of it out with the chisel. And I'm sorry that you ended up getting a great view of the back of my head for a decent chunk of that. Now, I was fighting over what I could do to kind of soften all of the edges. I originally thought of using just a round over bit on a router, but I realized that that would cause issues for the actual waterfall section. So what I decided to end up going with was to just chamfer all the edges, starting with a hand plane for all the straighter edges, and then for the waterfall section I could just use a chisel. And I only did the top because I like the sharp blocks for the end section, but you could do those as well. With everything all sanded up and finished, it's time to end up sealing the wood, and I like to do that with a bath of just mineral oil. So I just like to let my cutting board soak in mineral oil for a few hours. Now that it's done, it's time to test and see how good of a cutting board it actually is. So it was about lunchtime, and I thought that I might as well prepare a quick little steak for myself, because that's what I had in the fridge. Make sure if you're ever cooking steak, you want to do plenty of salt and pepper. So, thank you all for watching. In using this cutting board, I've noticed that I'm a little bit out of square, so I'm going to have to shave down one of these legs just a little bit, maybe about the distance of thickness of 1 or 2 pieces of paper. So I will do that later because I just made this and it looks delicious. So have a wonderful day. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.